Welcome leaders to this presentation on safety planning and insurance. This presentation is based on requirement 3 under You and Youth in their Senior Youth Leadership Manual. I want to encourage you to go through the entire presentation and take notes as we go through the audio and the slides as well. Right at the end of the presentation, there are assignment questions that you need to answer. It's very important that you go through the entire presentation so that you'll be adequately prepared to respond to the questions at the end. Okay, so I've entitled this presentation, Minimizing Your Risk. I want to think a good place for us to start is to define what we mean when you talk about risk. In a very simple way, we may consider risk as the chances or the possibility of something going wrong. What are the chances of an injury happening? What is the probability of damage happening to the property that we are working in or to the environment that we are in? So risk looks at the degree of exposure of ourselves or the environment or property. And of course, we do not always have our environment under our control. Sometimes situations may arise where things happen, an accident can happen. So we may not be able to completely eliminate danger. We may not be able to completely prevent a negative incident from happening, a bad incident from happening. However, as leaders, we can preemptively make plans, put initiatives to minimize the chances of something going wrong. We can mitigate risk. We can manage risk. This presentation hopefully will give ideas to young adult leaders, to us ambassador leaders, on how we can better manage risk, especially when you are working in ministry with young adults and ambassadors. I hope you'll enjoy the presentation, and I trust we're going to take away ideas and concepts that will make us more successful in our work as leaders. As we know, even in the corporate world, an organization that has got a strong risk management program has greater chances of success in its work. So us as leaders as well, we've got a vision, we've got a goal as we work with young people. Not short-term goals, but even long-term goals as we lead them. Our chances of success are also based on how we take care over the issues of risk and safety. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This slide considers different levels of risk. There are some activities that can be classified as low risk activities. There are some activities that we can be involved in with young adults or ambassadors, which we can classify as medium risk. And then there are some activities that we should consider as high risk activities. So under each column, I have examples of different activities that can be classified under these three broad categories. Under low risk, we may consider an example of a countryside hiking of 6 to 8 individuals, identifying object lessons in nature, board games, watching movies, learning music, drawing and painting. Okay, these activities are fairly low risk activities. This does not mean that nothing ever goes wrong when you are doing these events or these activities. Something can happen, accidents can happen. However, generally speaking, we can classify these events as low risk, especially when we compare and contrast them with other activities that we can be involved in. For example, if we move over to the next column, which talks about medium risk. All right. As opposed to a countryside hiking, if we consider a mountainside hiking, we have raised significantly the level of risk. Okay, especially if the group is a sizable group of people who are going on this hiking trail. Ball games, okay, cleaning up dump sites, jogging can be classified as medium risk, and especially when we compare walking, jogging, and sprinting. If a person who falls, or when they are walking, who slips and falls when they are walking, if you compare the chances of them getting hurt or injured by slipping when you are walking as compared to jogging or to sprinting, the person who is sprinting has got a higher chances or is at a higher risk of getting hurt or getting injured in a more significant way as compared to someone who's walking. So we can classify jogging as a medium risk activity. All right, garden work with tools. When you go for caving with an experienced or skilled tour guide, it's a fairly medium risk activity. Tree climbing, wood cutting. When you consider high risk activities in the very last column, we may consider something like a wild bush trail, where you may be exposed to insects or reptiles or wild animals. Okay. Campfires, swimming wherever there's water and there are people, we should consider that as a high risk activity. Mountain climbing, rocks can fall, you can slip and fall. All right, there's significant danger that's involved wherever you are involved in mountain climbing. Okay, canoeing, horse riding, working with electricity, and of course tree cutting should always be classified under high risk. All right, so this list gives you an idea of different activities that can fall under different categories or different levels of risk. So I want to encourage you that as you are doing your planning work with your committees, with the other leaders, that we try to see whether we can classify the event that you want to do or the activity that you want to do under low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And then we put in appropriate measures to try to mitigate that risk. All right, we shall be learning more about how we can better manage risk in the next coming slides. In this slide, we are talking about protection. We cannot talk about risk without talking about protection. In fact, I would say protection lies at the very foundation of risk management. You protect what you value. You protect what you treasure. You will not want to protect what is worthless, what is not worthy of safeguarding. What is our greatest treasure? What is our treasure as young adult leaders and as ambassadors? Our treasure are the people that we are working with, are the people that we are leading. So they need to be protected. I was going through a document on centers of youth evangelism, all right? And in this document, one of the paragraphs was talking about the ideals for the intergenerational church of refuge. And an idea that I picked from there was the ideal that every youth ministry should have, that every youth ministry should be inclusive, it should be accepting, it should be community oriented, it should be strategically placed, it should be safe, it should be a spiritual environment for all young adults. A key idea that I want to point out here is that every youth ministry should be a safe environment for young adults. And I want to think that is the idea behind the cities of refuge. When you go back in the Bible, in the Old Testament, we know that the children of Israelites were commanded by God that there be cities of refuge in various places in Israel, where people can find refuge, safety, and security. So our ministries, our clubs, should be places where young people find security, refuge, and protection. And as long as the young adult leaders have got protection top of mind, we then have risk management already as an integral part of our work. It should be the very lifeblood of our planning initiatives. And we can then guarantee an environment where our young people can prosper and can reach their potential and can achieve greater success when you've got protection as a core value of the work that we are doing. So protection is not a passive state. Protection is an active concept. It's an active idea. It's a state of vigilance. It's a state of purposefulness. Protection requires a preemptive approach to planning and organization. Protection also includes the idea of being prepared. Eventualities can happen, emergencies can happen, all right? However, when we have protection as a core value, as the integral fabric of our work, then we have greater chances of success, and we can thereby manage our risk much better. So welcome to the world of senior youth ministries. It's a world full of adventure and fun and many activities. It's a dynamic world, and all things are happening at the same time in the world of young people. Okay, so look at it. There's fun, there's excitement, there are challenging activities, whether they be physical or other activities. There are high risk activities, adventures. Young people may be trying new hobbies, new recreational activities. And some of these activities may be activities that they are doing because they are willing to experiment, they want to experiment, or they've been challenged by their friends to participate in the activity. Or they may want to be competing against each other as they do these particular events. Okay, so that's the world that we live in. Okay, now as we're involved in these activities, it may come with consequences. When things go wrong, there can be liabilities. Property can be damaged. There could be injury. All right, there could be damage to the environment. And as leaders, we can be liable for damage to the environment or injury or damage or loss of property. So we need to be cognizant of eventualities that can come out of the activities and the initiatives that we may be leading young people into. Okay, so sometimes in this world of senior youth ministries, there can be injuries, and a lot of these injuries can be avoidable if the necessary precautions had been put in place. And sad to say, sometimes even unnecessary deaths can happen when there's negligence and where adequate care has not been taken into place or considered. You can even have a sad situation where a young adult can lose their life, and that can have a detrimental and damaging impact on the ministry, and it may be very difficult to start again. Once you've had such a sad situation, for the work to now start up and to move on ahead, in a positive direction, it will be much more challenging. Better to avoid situations that can complicate our work as young adult leaders or as ambassador leaders. At the same time, while there's risk, while there's adventure, while there are hobbies, while there are all these recreational activities taking place all around us in the world of senior youth ministries, it's also moments and occasions where some people make lifelong decisions for Christ. So really it's a mixed world. It's a world full of different activities and events happening at the same time. So while we are involved in the various activities in the world of young adults and ambassadors, we need to bear in mind that no two activities are exactly the same. Even if we've been doing the same activity for years, over and over and over and over again, it is not true that each time you do that activity, or each time you repeat that activity, that it is exactly the same as the previous one. Okay. Now, because no two activities are exactly the same, it means that there is an element of risk that's involved. Something can go wrong. Okay. So accidents do happen. That's why it's important that in any activity that we're involved in, we need to be vigilant. We need to have a high degree of alertness. Experience is important, and we may be experienced hikers, or we may be experienced with working with campfires. We can be experienced campers. All right. That experience should be there to teach us and to guide us and to watch out and to navigate potential dangers. And that experience should help us to identify and to know risky behaviors. That experience should help us to navigate past those risky behaviors. And that experience should help us to manage situations or eventualities that can become difficult or complicated. That is where experience fits in. All right. But we should also, at the same token, talk about how experience sometimes can also lead to negligence. So when you are familiar with a certain task and you know exactly how to do it and you are very experienced in it, sometimes we lower our guard. And because of that, we may become vulnerable to accidents. We may develop a degree of carelessness or negligence because we've been doing it over and over and over again, and we tend to be more careless because we think we now know it. We know the ins and the outs, and we are the masters of the situation. But because of that very thought that we have the situation under control because of our experience, we can then expose ourselves to dangers, and we can make ourselves and the people that we are working with more vulnerable to dangers because we think we are very experienced. That's why a lot of accidents happen when people are close to their homes. It is known that a lot of accidents happen within a few kilometers from home. It's because when you are getting close to, when you are in environments that you are familiar with, in areas that we know very well, we tend to relax, we tend to lower our guard, and before we know it, we're involved in an accident. All right. So it's important that our experience becomes a tool, it becomes an asset that can help us to preemptively manage risky outcomes. So accidents have happened. There have been injuries that have taken place that were not necessary, that could have been prevented. There have been deaths that have happened that could have been avoided. There are sexual misconducts and sexual misconduct allegations that have taken place in young adult ministries, in ambassador ministries, that could have been avoided. Assaults, sexual assaults at camps, in planning meetings, in various activities that young people are involved in, that could have been avoided. All right. There are lawsuits or claims, liability claims that are made on leaders, and property claims that have been made because leaders may not have been as vigilant as they ought to have been. Okay. So Good leadership looks ahead. It considers what can happen. It considers potential dangers. It considers risk. And it puts in place measures that are appropriate to mitigate and to manage negative outcomes from the various activities that we involve young adults and ambassadors in. So it's important, vitally important, that you as a young adult leader, as an ambassador leader, that you review all activities that the group that you are leading is going to be involved in. In that way, we avoid nasty surprises. So we should never take anything for granted. It's important to know what lies ahead. It's important to gather information beforehand. We are leading a group of young people who are going to be involved in a particular event. We are going to go for canoeing, we are going to be hiking, we are going to be doing fire building, we are going to be playing board games, we are going to go for an evening concert or a social night. We need to bear in mind all the different activities that the young people are going to be involved in, and preemptively plan all the activities, review all the activities, and thereby we avoid having nasty situations or surprises. And if we're going to a place that we've never visited before, we've never been before, it's good for us to pay a visit to that place. Let's ask other people who've been there before what the place is like. What do we expect to see? What do we expect to experience? Go into the internet, look at the reviews if it's a campsite, look at the comments that people have made about that particular campsite, look at the review comments, and look at the tenor of the words. What kind of experience did the people who visited that site, what kind of experience did they have, and what did they think about the experience, and what do they think about the place? All right, so it's good for us to preemptively identify what may go wrong, and thereby we avoid nasty surprises. From this slide, we are now looking at how we as leadership can more effectively plan to manage risk. We are looking at what we can do, initiatives, and critical concepts or strategies that we can integrate in our work as leadership to minimize and to manage risk, and thereby create safer environments for the people that we're leading. So this slide is a critical slide. It's a foundational slide for safety planning in Adventist Youth Ministries. So a good place to start as we do our planning work is to consider the past, and also to consider where we are today, the present, and to consider where we want to go, which is the future. Oftentimes when you plan our activities, when you do our programming as young adult leaders, we sometimes look at where we are today and where we want to be. Maybe we roll out a survey and we ask the youths what they want to see this year, what activities do they want to be involved in, and they write and they fill in forms, they contribute, and we take all that into account, and we plan for the year, and we submit it to the church board, and then we execute those plans. Oftentimes we don't do enough of reviewing the past. I want to believe that a critical aspect of good planning, good risk management, is looking back to the past, asking ourselves, what was the quality of the previous experiences? If we want to do a camp this year, maybe it's a good idea for us to consider what was the quality of the previous camp that we had. We should ask ourselves, what happened at that camp? What were the good things that happened? Where did we go wrong in certain places? Maybe there was an incident that happened. Could it have been avoided? What could we have done better to avoid the last incident? So these are critical elements that need to come into good planning. And as mature, responsible Christian leadership, as we do a review exercise, we are not witch hunting. We are not looking for blame. We're not looking for someone to accuse, but we are looking at it objectively, and we are looking at it taking accountability and responsibility as leadership. This group accountability, even if we were not in leadership last year, but we are saying to ourselves, okay, last year such and such incident happened. Now, as we are planning as a committee, we want to ensure that we avoid the mistakes of the previous experiences, so that our youths can have a safer, protected experience as we move forward. So reviewing is a critical element. It's a foundational element in all good planning, especially when you are talking about risk management, when you want to avoid negative incidents, when you want to avoid accidents. It's good for us to learn the lessons from the past and thereby improve the quality of our work, improve the quality of our planning, and even the execution of our planning with the youth in the youth ministry. So let's ask ourselves, what happened? What could have been avoided? And also very important, how can we improve? Even if nothing bad happened, we are not necessarily looking only at the bad things that happened, but even what we think was a good experience. How can we improve that experience to make it even better for the people that we are working with, or for the people that we are leading? So we should review and learn key lessons. And if we can learn those lessons and even write down those lessons, all the better. And we can integrate those lessons, those key learnings from the previous experience into the current planning that we are doing for this year. Okay, so for us to plan well, for us to move forward, we need to have these three elements of reviewing, taking the key lessons from the previous experiences, and then we plan. So these are like three cogs that are integrated. All right, these are wheels that are connected, and they move together and they affect each other. We cannot only have one wheel of planning without reviewing the past. We need to learn the lessons of the past so that we are able to move forward. So good planning has a foundation in these three key areas: reviewing, learning lessons, and then taking that review, those reviews and those lessons and integrating them into the planning for the future. Now, as we plan ahead, it is vital, very important, that planning be done within the setting of a planning committee. You are a leader, but that does not mean that you've got all the skills, all the experience, and all the knowledge to plan everything by yourself. Good leaders do not work alone. Good leaders identify the potential and the gifts in other team members. Good leaders do not see themselves as the source of all knowledge, or the source of all information, but good leaders also identify the gifts and the talents and the skills in the other people that they work with. The good thing about the youth ministries organization is that we've got various structures within our organizations that will help to make the work of leadership more efficient and more effective. A critical element in our organization is the concept of committees. So we've got embedded within our constitutions in the youth ministry committees. Okay, the principle of having committees that help with effective planning, effective implementation of different programs. So your work as a young adult leader and as an ambassador leader is to ensure that when we are now planning for the work that's ahead of us, we work within the framework of a committee. So have a planning committee in place If it is not the administrative committee of your ministry or the executive committee of a ministry, you can set up an ad hoc, or the other leaders, together with the other leaders, you set up an ad hoc committee that looks maybe at a specific event or a specific activity that you want to be involved in. What does a committee bring? A committee brings different individuals with different backgrounds. Those different backgrounds brings diversity in planning. They are able to look at programming and planning from different eyes, from different angles, and they are able to cater for a wider portion of the group than if you're doing it alone. A committee brings different insights to one event. You are now enabled to look at the same event from multiple eyes, from multiple facets, and identify potential dangers, potential risks, potential experiences that the youths might have. And that's very important for a quality program or for a quality experience. A committee brings knowledge. Some are more knowledgeable than others. Some have got more experience than others in the same event. And this helps to safeguard and to protect everyone's going to be involved in that activity, because some are bringing their experience, they bring their knowledge. They tell us, they alert us on what to look out for, what may be the potential dangers, how to manage emergencies and certain situations that might arise. And that's the importance of having a committee in place. Within that committee, it's also easier to delegate responsibility. It's very easy for a leader to be overwhelmed. His work is not only to lead out and to make announcements, but he has to look after different individuals who are participating in the particular event. But this can become very overwhelming, especially with a large group. When you take all the responsibilities of planning and of activities, announcements, and various facets of the work, and you are taking it all by yourself. But within a committee, you are able to delegate responsibilities. And while we're here, I'd want to emphasize the importance of discussing safety within that planning committee. Safety should be discussed as an agenda item in the planning committee. This will help us to properly design a program or an activity in which risk is minimized or even better managed. Maybe one of you can become the risk officer. In that way, we know that the element of safety and risk is being taken care of by someone. Someone's paying special attention to eventualities that can happen within that particular event. Now, that does not mean that that particular individual is the one that is bearing all the accountability should something negative or should an incident happen. But what we are doing here is that we are creating a focus point where we conscientiously and proactively look at risk and possibilities, or look at things that can happen during an activity and an event. And we've got someone who's delegated to help us in identifying situations that need to be brought under our control and our attention. So the book of Proverbs chapter 11 verse 14 says, where there's no counsel, the people fall, but in a multitude of counselors there is safety. I wish that all leaders who are working with young adults and ambassadors, we have this verse top of mind. Where there's counsel, where there's no counsel, people fall. And indeed, if you work alone, if you plan alone, you are not going to be a successful leader. But as you work within a team framework, as you work within a group, a leadership group, there is safety. Now, as you plan as a committee, it's important that we get into greater detail on risk management around the activity that we are planning. So this slide focuses on what we should consider in mitigating risk as leadership. So we need to deliberately consider the various aspects, all the aspects of the activity that we are planning, and thereby better manage risk and also create a safer environment for the people that we are leading. So whatever activity that we are doing with young people or with a group, we need to have leaders that have the necessary qualifications and experience. And this will help us a lot. This will be an asset for the group that is being led, because people with the experience, they know the various challenges that may arise from the activity. They know the dangers that might be involved in that particular activity, and they can also help to mitigate or to manage an emergency. All right. So the more risky the activity, the greater the need of a qualified instructor, and the more experience that instructor needs to have. For example, if you are going to be involved in rock climbing, or working with fire, or canoeing, or swimming, you need to have instructors who are well qualified and experienced in that activity. The activity needs also to be targeted to the level of experience of the group. So within the group, if a large portion of the group has got no familiarity or experience, or have never been exposed to the activity, then we need to be more careful as we plan for that activity. We need to even have more experienced instructors. And sometimes it may be a good idea not to even participate in the activity, especially if the number of participants is fairly significant. However, if we are going to nevertheless go for the activity, we want to try it, we want to experience it, then it's important that there be a good pre-activity training session, so that everyone in the group knows exactly what to expect, knows what to do during the activity, and in the event of an emergency, they know exactly what they should do. All right. So it's important that we either target the activity to the level of experience with the group, or we have very well qualified instructors to help and to assist during that activity. Obviously, when you are talking about when you are doing an activity, the number of participants in the activity is important in managing risk. So generally, the larger the group, the greater the degree of exposure. So when you have a large group of young adults or ambassadors, let's say you've got a group of 35 or 40 people in your group, it's a good idea to consider breaking that large group into smaller units. Smaller units are more manageable, and have an individual to act as a leader in each group. In that way, you'll be better managing the degree of exposure when you're working with a larger group. Okay. So now we talk about equipment. It's important to know and to understand the condition of the equipment that's going to be used in the activity. Sometimes maybe it's not equipment necessarily. It could be maybe the room that you are going to be doing the activity in, the place where you're going to be working. All right. Is it in good state? Is it in good repair? Is it safe? And importantly to consider as well, is it suitable for the activity that we want to do? And is everything in place? If it's equipment that has movable parts, is everything in its place? And it may be equipment like protective wear. Okay, is everything there? Does it protective wear often comes not only with the suit, but also it often comes also with gloves or with boots or eye protection, or even sometimes a hard hat. All right. We cannot take anything for granted, hoping that everything will be okay. When things do go wrong, we may now begin to realize that we're more negligent than we should have been. Okay. Important for us to consider the allotted time of activity. Obviously, the more time we spend doing an activity, the greater the degree of exposure. All right. So we should plan our activities in such a way that we complete those activities within the specific or allotted period of time. If we continue with that activity endlessly, fatigue may kick in and distraction may kick in, and we may have an increased degree of risk. Transportation is something that sometimes we may take for granted as we plan, but it's important for us to diligently consider the condition of the vehicles that we are using to transport the people that, or the team members. Okay, condition of the car looks at involves or includes things like the tires of the car, especially when you are driving in wet conditions. You don't want to expose the whole group to accidents. All right. The number of passengers who can fit into the vehicle. The law requires that each passenger should have their own seatbelt. And as good Christian leaders, responsible leaders, we cannot afford to be negligent on this issue. All right. You can have a driver who is very experienced, but he doesn't have the other drivers around him under his control. And the last thing that you want is to have your team involved in a nasty accident and none of your team members had a seatbelt on. All right. So the chances of bad injury happening as a result of not having seatbelts during transportation is very high. Okay. We need to also consider supervision. We already talked about the experience needed for qualified leaders during an activity. Okay. Experienced leaders can help as tour guides. They can also help in the event of an emergency. So we need to consider what can go wrong and what would we do if things do go wrong. So this slide is an overview and possibly a summary of what's involved in strategic planning in youth ministry. All right. As we are planning, we need to look ahead of us. Okay. Where do we want to be? Where do we see ourselves? And as we plan, we focus on the details. As the last or previous slide was focusing on, we were looking at the activity and what may be the risk elements in that particular activity. Okay, so we don't gloss over the details, but we spend time identifying the various elements in that particular activity and what may be the degree of exposure, what are the risk elements in that activity. Okay, we need to plan for emergencies, and when we talk about emergencies, we need to have contact numbers. We need to know who are the next of kin of the members that we are working with, of the team members. Where's the nearest hospital and how do we get there? Do we have contact numbers or contact details of the police or the ambulance? All these things we cannot take for granted. They are part of the planning work that a responsible youth leadership group will have. Okay, we need to plan. We have to have a contingency plan in place. Maybe the activity that we have planned to do, when we arrive at the site, we find that we're not able to do the activity for various reasons. Maybe it's risky, or maybe we now do not have the right people to guide us, or maybe things have just changed. The environment has just changed. It's no longer suitable for us to continue with the activity. We need to be able to be flexible and to substitute and do another activity that may be safer or that's more appropriate for the occasion. And sometimes we should also learn to just say no. All right. when we can sense that this doesn't look too safe, this is no longer suitable or appropriate, or the stakes are too high and we may be exposed to greater risk than we would want, it may be important to just say, no, let's not do it. And as this saying says, the genesis of many accidents take place in the boardroom. So how we plan directly affects the success of an activity. If we do not plan well, we may expose our group. As leaders, we may make our group more vulnerable to an incident. So indeed, the root cause of many accidents and incidences and nasty experiences that our youth may be involved in, it may actually lie in how we plan as leadership. So critically, how we plan is important. In the degree of planning and the detail that we go into planning, it is the foundation of good risk management. In these slides, we're continuing to look at the responsibility of leadership. In the last slide, we considered the planning committee and its place in risk management. The very presence of a planning committee and their work to get into detail around the activity that we want to do, their work in identifying the potential risks in itself points to organization. When we've got a planning committee in place, that's a sign that we are an organized leadership. All right. The other idea that we need to consider is the idea of duty of care. What is duty of care? Duty of care speaks directly to leadership. And it says that leadership must take reasonable care to avoid acts or omissions that can cause injury, damage to a person, to property, or to the environment. So duty of care is a principle, it's a core value that needs to be in the heart of every leader, in which he purposefully ensures that he is not involved in careless acts or careless omissions that can result in injury or damage to a person, to property, or to the environment. And we cannot only speak of duty of care, we also need to understand the concept of negligence. Negligence is omission to do something that a reasonable person would do. It's the omission to do something that a reasonable person would do. Okay? Especially under the same circumstances. Okay? Or putting it another way, negligence is doing something a reasonable person would not do under the same circumstances. All right? So that is what negligence is all about. And usually when there's an incident, when something has gone wrong, human nature looks for someone to accuse. And usually someone is blamed for something. Someone is seen to be the one responsible for what has happened. So there's always someone who is looked at as being the one responsible for the event that has happened. All right. So we need to maybe understand or to determine whether negligence was involved. And there are three questions that we can use to determine whether negligence was involved or not in that particular incident. And the first question would be, was there a duty owed to the person who was being accused? Was there a duty owed to the person? Maybe this individual was trying to fix an electric cable, and then he was shocked in the process. All right, because he didn't know that he was touching live wires, and the current went through him, and he got an electric shock. The question that we have is, okay, was there a duty we owed to that person? Could we have warned him? Could we have assessed whether he's qualified to do the repair work that he wants to do? Could we have stopped him and maybe get someone who is qualified or get a more responsible person to do the repair work. So the first question is, was there a duty that was owed to the person that we are accusing? Question number 2, was there a breach to the duty that was due to him? In other words, did we fail to do something in order to avoid the incident? In other words, are we also responsible in some way in the incident happening? All right. In other words, we are also asking, was the injury that happened foreseeable? Was due care exercised to prevent that incident from happening? Okay, so that's the second question. All right, was there a breach in our duty to that person? Did we fail to address something? And maybe if we had addressed it, the incident would not have happened. Okay, then question number 3, in determining negligence. Would the injury have still occurred regardless of the action of the accused? Would it still have happened anyway? Was it completely out of control? And obviously, if the incident was completely out of our control, then we may not say there was pure negligence in the activity, all right? But if the injury that happened could have been prevented, maybe there was a degree of negligence. We've already spoken about having an emergency plan. That leadership need to have an emergency plan. We've talked about equipment, and we are saying here instructors need to have adequate supervision, all right? And supervision must also be continuous. We cannot be distracted as we are supervising a particular event. As leaders, we cannot afford to be distracted and have our attention turned elsewhere when the group is busy involved in a medium or high risk activity especially, right? So we need to have constant vigilant supervision. And we talked already about having skilled instructors with the right qualifications and experience to help in managing risk. And as we said in an earlier slide, that in the youth ministry there can be damages, all right? There can be liabilities, and leadership needs to understand, we need to understand as leaders that we can be held liable for injury or damage to property or to losses, all right? Hence, it's very important that when we are planning, we plan together as a committee and we share ideas and we try to look at the activity that we want to be involved in from different facets or from different angles. So as leadership, these are some of the ideas that we need to consider, some of the tools that can help us to protect not only ourselves, but also to protect the people that we are leading in. We need to have good communicating devices, all right? This will help us to manage risk. We need to have the right protective wear, all right? That's appropriate for the activity. We need to have a first aid kit, especially when we are doing outdoor work. And it's not enough to have a first aid kit. We need to know what's in the kit, and we need to know how to use that kit, all right? In the event of an injury, we need to know how to use the bandages. We need to know how to use the antiseptic gel, in the first aid kit, right? So we need to have someone who's skilled, someone who understands how to use the first aid equipment within the team, all right? And the equipment that we put on also needs to fit, just to be the proper size for every participant. This slide is a focus on transportation. And one of the reasons why I included this slide, it's because we often take transportation for granted. Oftentimes in youth ministries, the work of arranging transport is delegated to one individual. And when the transport arrives, people jump into the vehicle and we go to our destination. But sometimes we don't develop a purposeful approach to ensure that will minimize risk as we plan around the issue of transportation. So this slide is challenging us leaders to take a step back and go into more detail around transport planning. Do we ensure that there are enough seat belts for every passenger in the vehicle? Do we ensure that the driver who is driving is not texting while he's driving? Do we ensure that our luggage is secure and also in the right place? Do we even check if the driver has got a driver's license? Are we certain that he is experienced enough and he knows what he's doing as he's transporting the group from A to B? So these are some of the many considerations around transport that we need to start proactively considering as young adults. Okay, in this last slide, I just want to highlight the idea that no amount of insurance can compensate for an injury, and no amount of insurance can compensate for death. It might sound obvious, but it's important to understand the importance of risk management and safety planning. So insurance is not an escape route. It's not a compensation at all. It does not replace or substitute careful planning or safety planning. So while the conference may have an insurance program in place for all the youths in our churches, I would want to say to leaders, it's very important to also encourage individual members in the young adults ministry and in the ambassador ministry to also have their personal insurances. And when the group is involved in various activities, it may be a good idea to find out and to just encourage all members of the youth ministries to share their information around medical insurance with the leadership in the event of an incident that may come handy. Okay, so we have come to the end of this presentation, and this last slide is speaking about the assignment that we need to do. All right, so there are 3 questions that we are going to be need to be responded to as part of your work, part of the work that's involved in under this requirement. Okay, so the first question says, based on this presentation, identify 5 areas or initiatives in your senior youth ministry where there is need to reduce risk and to improve safety. Okay, so 5 areas in your work as a leader within your church, local church, where you can say, okay, we need to reduce risk here, or we need to improve safety in this way. All right, and then number 2, we talked about duty of care in this presentation. So tell us in your own words how you as leadership understands duty of care. Then number 3, when we talk about negligence, which 3 questions identify whether negligence existed in the event of an incident? That also has been covered in this presentation. Okay, so please do this assignment, and then you can submit your responses to sylcurriculum@gmail.com. You send your responses via Google Drive. All right, and as you send your submissions, please remember to include your name and your contact details in every submission. And as you share your assignment with your instructor, please make sure that your submission is in edit or comment mode, because if it is locked for viewing only, I will not be able to edit or to comment or to process your submission. God bless you. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you and goodbye.